Welcome to Salt Lake City's virtual Ask Me Anything session to talk about the Foothills Trail System Plan. I'm Brian Young with SLC TV. Over the last few years, Salt Lake City's Trails and Natural Lands Division, with the help of outside consultants and stakeholders, developed a new Foothills Trail System Plan. The Trails Plan was developed with the goal of creating a trail system that will be better equipped to handle increased use as the population of the city continues to grow. Recently, though, concerns have been expressed by numerous trail users that trail construction in the central foothills, completed in 2020 and 2021, may not be meeting the stated objectives of the 2020 Foothill Trails Master Plan. Salt Lake City takes these concerns very seriously and has decided to halt the addition of new trails in the central foothills to conduct a thorough review of whether recent trail work is meeting the objectives of the Foothill Trails Master Plan and meeting the needs of Salt Lake City residents. We're here today with Lewis Kogan, Director of Salt Lake City's Trails and Natural Lands Division, and David Foster, a principal with Alta Planning and Design. And they're going to answer your questions about the current status of the Trails Plan and concerns that have been expressed by some of the trail users. So first, before we do that, Lewis is going to give us a brief presentation about where we're at with the plan and how we got here. And then we're going to be taking your questions. We've got a team of folks looking for your questions on Facebook. So make sure you leave them there in the comments for the video, and then we'll make sure that we get them asked here in this forum. So thank you, Lewis and David, for joining us, and that's your cue.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Brian, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm gonna pull up a little slideshow presentation. Give me just a moment to share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. All right, I'm going to back up a bit and summarize, as Brian said, how we got here and why Salt Lake City began working on a comprehensive trail system plan for the foothills in the first place. Our planning effort was motivated from a recognition that population growth and recreation trends were driving a steady increase in use in the foothills natural area above the city. And I think as these photos demonstrate, without proactive management, the growth in usership is just accelerating environmental degradation, trail user conflicts and safety issues, and erosion and degradation of many existing trails. I just pulled all these out of my camera roll this morning, but I think they're indicative of the kind of impacts that increasing usership is having on trails across the trail system. With the exception of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, most trails in the foothills simply evolved from user-created routes following the shortest distance between 2 points of interest, or along old quarry roads and 4x4 Jeep tracks from decades past. A patchwork of land ownership presented challenges to coherent trail management, and a growing spiderweb of paths and tracks was exacerbating the spread of noxious weeds and other environmental impacts. In 2016, Salt Lake City set out to create a logical framework to establish a network of intentionally created recreational trails loosely organized around the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, with a focus on achieving 5 primary objectives. Through intentional trail system design and management, the new trails would Salt Lake City Public Lands was tremendously successful in securing funding from a variety of sources, which allowed us to move quite quickly to implement the recommended first phase of the project, which was focused on trail construction in Lower City Creek and above the Avenues neighborhood. 3 different professional trail builders constructed over 10 miles of new trail between August of 2020 and May of this year, including multi-use trails, hiking trails, and biking trails. In all, it was a remarkable amount of change in the first year following plan adoption, and the changes have been, frankly, alarming to some people. Not all of them have been welcomed, and the mayor and city council recently decided, based on feedback they were receiving, that the city would halt construction of the new trails while city staff and partners reviewed the work performed to date in order to understand whether and how well the phase 1 improvements are achieving the stated goals of the master plan. Salt Lake City is currently soliciting feedback from trail users on the new trail construction. If you are someone who's used one of our new trails, I absolutely encourage you to follow the website and take this survey. And we are at this time working to develop a process to evaluate the work performed to date, as well as future plan components to ensure that we are going to achieve consistency with those 5 major objectives, with environmental sustainability, enjoyable trails, accessible trails, safe trails, and low maintenance. That's where we are now. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, turn it back over to Brian, and then looking forward to taking your questions.
The first thing I want to do is actually bring Dave into the conversation. And Dave, I'm wondering if you can talk about Alta Planning and what your role in the project has been to date and what your role is going to be going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So Alta Planning and Design, we're based out of Portland, Oregon, but we have offices all across the country, including an office here in Salt Lake City. And we're made up of planners, landscape architects like myself, and engineers who focus exclusively on creating active communities. And part of that is, recreational trails plans. We also do a fair amount of active transportation planning. We worked on Salt Lake City's bicycle and pedestrian master plan and have been involved in a number of other complete streets projects within the city. But we have worked on a number of recreational trails plans throughout the Rocky Mountain West in places like Mountain Village, Colorado, Spokane, Washington, Big Sky, Montana. And so, these types of plans are part of what we do. For Salt Lake City specifically, we were hired by Parks and Public Lands to kind of facilitate the development of this master plan, and a large portion of that was focused on public engagement. There's also design guidelines, obviously, the trail alignments perspective of the plan, and finally there were some kind of maintenance and implementation sections. So that's been our role to date. We have worked with Salt Lake City Parks and Public Lands on other kind of things associated with the trails master plan, including some concepts to improve trailheads specifically. But to date, our involvement has been mostly focused on the master plan.
So speaking of the master plan, Lewis, I'd like to ask you, this is a question that we're getting frequently from the public. Does the trail does the work that you've been doing in the foothills now match what was proposed in the Foothill Trails master plan?
Got it. Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Brian. I guess first I would say that as with management decisions for other Salt Lake City parks and open spaces, the final decisions on trail alignments are made by land managers and are informed by plan recommendations and public feedback, informed by information provided by staff, our consultants and contractors, any legally imposed requirements, and evolving conditions on the ground. Salt Lake City's Foothill Trails Plan is, I believe, among the most detailed and comprehensive natural surface trail system plans for municipalities nationwide. And user and stakeholder feedback informed recommended trail improvements, from management designations to proposed routes and the closure of social trails. But I will say all trails constructed between 2020 and 2021 are consistent with the functional recommendations of the Foothill Trails Plan. And those alignments roughly follow the approximate plan level recommendations that are shown in the document. Our final on-the-ground decisions were based on those recommendations and then modified following on-ground recommendations of our professional trail builders that were hired by the city, and based on what these contracts believed would best meet the city's objectives and the realities of the terrain. In some cases, management designations for trails have remained more restrictive, in particular to bicycles, where we might say no bikes, where we had proposed in the plan allowing uphill bikes, until Salt Lake City can evaluate whether the downhill bike route proposed in the plan will be feasible, or whether we can achieve shared uses safely.
So a question, we've got a comment from BJ on the Facebook. And BJ expresses a concern that we've heard a lot in sort of questions that get frequently asked of the project, but he notes that they've worked in trail building, and they're concerned about that deep sort of hillside cut or those scars that people are seeing with the trails. And they're concerned that maybe it's not best practices for a sustainably constructed trail. Can you talk to us, either one of you, about how the trails were constructed and what we should be seeing, and if there is cause for concern with these scars that we're seeing?
Yeah, I could take a crack at that question and then maybe turn it over to Dave. I will say that we, as we were developing the Trails Plan document, one thing that we acknowledged right away is that many of the existing trails in the foothills are very far from, I think, what are generally considered modern best practices in sustainable trail design in terms of the grade of the trail, drainage features to allow water to drain off the trail so it doesn't erode, width and slope, that sort of thing. I think you said that the hillside cut doesn't look sustainable, and really what determines the how large the hillside cut is what is this, how steep is the side slope that the trail is crossing, and then how wide is the trail that you're cutting in. And the wider the trail you're cutting in and the steeper the side slope, the larger that hillside cut needs to be. We are working with, in general, terrain on the Wasatch Front here that tends to be much steeper than what you would see on the Wasatch Back or in other locations around Utah. And so, in many cases, in order to get a trail that's at a modest grade to cross a steep slope, you're going to have a larger hillside cut. Those do revegetate over time, and I think what sometimes people don't realize is that when you're walking on your favorite trails up in the Uintas or any other location, you don't see what was initially a hillside cut because it's completely revegetated. But initially, the first couple of years after that trail was constructed, that cut was there and was in many cases very large. So I think I think that's how I'd encourage people to think about this. The first year or couple of years following trail construction, I think it's very common on steep terrain to see a large hillside cut. But based on our past experience in Salt Lake City and elsewhere, that does revegetate, and when that happens, the trail is largely going to be invisible from below. Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I might just add that, in the foothills specifically, given the environment and kind of the wide open nature, as opposed to up in Summit County or the Schneiderville Basin, the trail cuts are just much more visible. You have some patches of scrub oak that can obscure it in some places, but in a lot of places you just have open native grasses. And so the environment of the foothills, makes the trail cut very obvious initially, but after 2, 3, 4 years, that trail cut will start to disappear.
So we've got a question from Polly on Facebook, and this is a follow-up to kind of that first question I asked about the Foothill Trails Master Plan in general. And Polly wants to know, that you said that the plan is being roughly followed, and they're wondering why it's not being more specifically followed. Is that because of sort of realities on the ground as you get there, or what causes those shifts from the plan? Or is it, no good plan survives contact with, the opposition?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. The master plan document was never intended to be, an exact blueprint of where precisely trails would go on the ground. We just didn't map things to that level of resolution, and the type of feedback that we were soliciting from people by and large was, we want a trail to go from, point A to point B up this drainage, serve this function or this user group. And we did a fair degree of ground truthing over the course of plan development, but not the level of ground truthing that occurs immediately prior to trail construction, when you can get a professional trail builder on the ground, someone who is very experienced in both the art and science of trail building, and they can say, your trail, ought to go here, like follow the terrain in such a way that will produce the best possible trail. So that's really, in terms of why does it not exactly follow? I think there was, there is a fair degree of confusion among some trail users who have read the plan, in part because we wanted to provide maps of the proposed system, and those maps look like, a map that you would open up and use to follow trails. But those were not intended to be the, down to the 100-foot, 50-foot level blueprints. They were, they were intended to say this trail should, go up this canyon, follow this ridge line, have this management designation, et cetera.
I could add too that, we, like Lewis mentioned, we tried to do some ground truthing of key segments during the development of the master plan. And we had tried to adhere to some industry practices in terms of aligning trails, trying to keep things generally below a 10% grade, trying to locate switchbacks and flatter areas. But ultimately, the contractor himself charges, a fee to do the specific trail alignment. And it was always the intent that they would determine the final alignment with the general goals of complying with the goal of the master plan for that particular trail segment.
So we've got another question from Facebook, and Joey, again, here sort of reflects some things we've heard about the shifting uses for existing trails or new trails. And he says, and I'm wondering if maybe this is part misunderstanding or not, but why are trails that have been foot traffic trails for decades now being closed and becoming downhill only biking trails? Why not create new trails for downhill biking only and leave the multi-use trails as they've been for 50 plus years? And I'm wondering if you can address that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and Joey makes a really good point there. It is our intent, where possible, to try to preserve the most existing uses on a trail that we feel like we can continue to maintain. A trail that doesn't need to be completely closed or replaced because it's unsustainable. And I'm trying to think through all the recommendations of the plan. I think there is really only one, I believe there's only one trail that is an existing hiking multi-use trail that we proposed converting to a downhill bike trail. And that was a portion of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail between the I Street, 18th Avenue, Meadows, and Bonneville Boulevard and City Creek. And that was a difficult decision, but one that was in the plan. And the reason that it was in the plan was that we looked at where can we create a major trailhead that accommodates a lot of people accessing the trail system on the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and facilitate growth in that use. And it was not at exactly the location that trail came down and intersected Bonneville Boulevard. It was a short distance away on Bonneville Boulevard. And so we made the decision to in that particular case, relocate what was proposed as a hiking and uphill route for bikes so that it would be immediately across from that large trailhead facility. And that trail has been constructed and is available. And then we converted the old portion of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail to a downhill bike trail. That particular section of City Creek is steep with challenging terrain, and we looked at, but ultimately decided that it would not be feasible to create another downhill bike route in the vicinity. So I think, to Joey's point, acknowledge it's not ideal, but I think that was the one place that we decided that was the route we had to go.
So we've got a question from Rob on Facebook, and Rob is concerned, are motorized vehicles now allowed on the trail system? Because they're seeing more and more e-bikes and signs restricting motor vehicles missing.
Well, I can take that as well. Motorized vehicles right now are I can speak to Salt Lake City. They are not allowed in Salt Lake City open spaces, except for approved management purposes. And I know that in the past, there have been pretty extensive efforts to get motorized vehicles out of the foothills and off of the trail system in decades past. And I think that the emergence in particular of e-bike technology is starting to challenge this. Right now, Salt Lake City ordinance defines e-bikes as a type of motorized vehicle. And so per that, e-bikes are still prohibited on Salt Lake City property everywhere. I don't want to speak entirely to the foothills as a whole because, as I said early on in the presentation, the foothills are actually made up of a number of different management jurisdictions, Forest Service, state land, University of Utah, et cetera, and the rules are not consistent across the board. But it is our intention to continue to develop signage, including both wayfinding and regulatory signage for the foothills so that we get accurate information out there in front of the public.
So we've got another question from Facebook. Catherine wants to know about, as you both spoke about seeing those trails get revegetated. Catherine wants to know, is that revegetation with native plants part of the plan and budget, or is it just sort of, how is that coming about?
Great, thank you. That's a really important question, and I think maybe I'll take a stab at that, and then I'll let Dave talk a little bit about best practices for trail closure and rehabilitation. But yes, in terms of revegetating the trail cuts or the disturbed areas where new trails are going in, I'll say that it depends on the location and how effectively we feel like the established plants are going to recolonize the disturbed areas, and if those are desirable plants, or if we're building a trail through an area that's primarily colonized with opportunistic or invasive plants. For some of the trails that we constructed, especially in Lower City Creek, we felt that wasn't the case, and so we reseeded behind the trail contractor, reseeded the disturbed areas, but we're not planning to do that everywhere. It really depends on a case-by-case basis. The other thing I want to say about native plants is that we feel that that preventative weed control along our trail corridors is an extremely important part of the long-term success of the trail system. We want to make sure that weeds from puncture vine to cheatgrass, yellow star thistle, and other nasty ones don't use our trail system, our trail corridors, to just become vehicles for dispersal deep into the more mid-country, backcountry locations in the Wasatch, and also don't degrade the user experience or wildlife habitat. And so we did recommend in the plan that we essentially have the city create an ongoing budget for that type of work to occur. And I'm happy to report that we requested funding from the mayor and city council in this past budget cycle, and for the first time ever, some amount of funding to go towards that work has been approved. So we're really excited about that. And maybe Dave, could I turn it over to you to talk a little bit about best practices for decommissioning?
Yeah, so Lewis spoke to kind of the revegetation efforts surrounding new trail construction and disturbances. The plan also looked at vegetating and rehabilitating some existing trails that don't meet kind of modern trail sustainability practices. And the plan kind of addressed this in two different ways. We had a number of trails that were slated for decommissioning that we identified as kind of active decommissioning candidates. So we took a more intensive, intensive strategy plan for those trails. So these are kind of the worst offenders that are really seeing a lot of erosion, big gullies, lots of trail braiding, trail widening. And for those, we specified actually ripping up the tread in some areas, closing trails with ditches or slash piles as available. So really taking a more hands-on approach in those areas. And then we had passive decommissioning trails, which were really meant to just discourage future use through signage but not, go to the full extent of revegetating and reseeding and ripping up the tread. And there was budgets included in the trail master plan for what that would take throughout the Foothills natural area to kind of decommission those worst offenders and those other passive decommissioning candidates. We also had a Foothills natural area seed mix that Lewis and Parks has used on previous projects that's really customized to the Foothills natural area as well.
Thank you for that. We've got a question, or a comment rather. And Lewis, I'm wondering if you can kind of take this and address the comment, but this is from Eric on Facebook, who writes, there are many trails that are open to hiking, but were obviously constructed for bike use. No one wants to hike these flat trails. They're only attractive to bikes. You've decreased hiking options. I'm 61 years old and I don't want to hike flat bike trails, nor does the vast majority of hikers. Can you address that concern or perception that he's got?
Yeah, that is I'm glad you I'm glad he asked that question, because it's one that we're hearing a lot. And I think, first of all, I'd like to counter that and say, just because a trail is much flatter or much more gradual than many of the hiking trails seen in the foothills today and up into this time, does not mean that it's been constructed for bikes, or really that I think it's only attractive. A trail like that is only attractive to bicycle use. Again, I direct people back to best practices for sustainable trail construction that are widely adopted. Forest Service, all the way through to the International Mountain Biking Association, recommends trails generally have a maximum grade of about 10%, which is not very steep. In some localized cases, they might push beyond that up to as much as 15. But I think that the most important principle in terms of long-term physical sustainability of trails is whether the trail is going to run water down it or not during snowmelt, during rain. And the steeper a trail is relative to the side slope that it's on, the more likely it is to retain water in the trail tread. And it's that water that carries the dirt and the trail surface away and washes it down the hill. And so our goal in coming back and trying to intentionally build trails for both hikers and for bike traffic is to remain consistent with those sustainable trail construction best practices. I will readily acknowledge that there's a lot of people out there who just enjoy hiking on steeper routes, and that feels hiking, they're out there looking to really get their heart rate up, or, go straight up the hill to their destination. And frankly, that type of trail is what has been in the Salt Lake City foothills and in many places around the Wasatch predominantly for a long time. So it's definitely, I acknowledge it feels like a change. But again, that doesn't mean that we're building the trail for bikes. It's also, our intention to attempt to leave trails out there on the landscape that are not formally adopted into the trail system, but that continue to follow these sort of popular steeper routes. But what we wanted to acknowledge is that as use on any of those steeper social trails increases due to more users on the trail, population growth, et cetera, eventually the increase in usership on an unsustainably steep trail is going to cause problems, which is why we felt like we needed to take a different route. And Dave, you might have, I don't know, do you have anything to add to that?
Lewis, you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but those trails that you mentioned that aren't formally adopted as part of the trail system, may remain in perpetuity. But if there's a documented environmental impact happening, then we wanted to leave the possibility for trail closures or trail mitigation to happen to kind of remedy that. And that's why those steeper trails aren't part of the formal trail system.
Yeah, that's accurate.
We've got a question from Christina on Facebook, and Christina says, I'm supportive of your plan and appreciate the time and thought which has been put in over the past 4 years. And she writes that she's frustrated that the building has been stopped. So what happens after this meeting? And she wants to know what she can do to support the plan and help move it forward.
Great, I appreciate that, and it's a good question. Right now, for Christina or anyone else who has any feedback, positive, negative, neutral, anything to say about the new trails that have been constructed, we're really looking for that feedback, and it's important that we receive it. That public survey that is open right now is specifically and especially targeting hearing from people, how do you feel we did for you on the new trails that were constructed? And I think it's really valuable for us to get that information after we've built so many miles of new trail just in a year. I also think that we still have a little bit of figuring to do about what exactly our process is going to look like to make sure that we are achieving the objectives of the plan with the work that has happened and the work that is planned before moving forward. What we want to make sure we don't do is don't throw out all of the really great work that happened in developing the master plan in the first place. We heard from a tremendous diversity of people and stakeholders, and we took all of that feedback to create the recommendations of the plan. And I think they're very good ones. I think that the question is whether, is our specific implementation on the ground serving to achieve those plan objectives? And that the process that we decide to go through over the next few months, I think, is going to depend on how much resources we have to throw at having others come in and do third-party evaluations. I can say that a couple of things I think will definitely happen. There is going to be a number beyond the survey, a number of additional opportunities for public engagement to get feedback from everyone on their concerns or their desires. I think we're also going to make sure that we have some additional experts look at the trail construction that occurred in 2020 and weigh in, tell us, how did we do? Did we follow best practices adequately? Did we do a good job? Did we miss the mark? And help inform and allow us to adapt going forward if necessary. We also have, I think, a lot of environmental due diligence to do, and that was planned to occur between phase 1 and phase 2 of trail construction anyway. The future phases of the plan start to push proposed trail development into parts of the foothills that haven't had quite as much impact from trail use, and we acknowledge that in the plan and said it's critical that we understand the data on wildlife habitat usage in particular, and that we study that before we build new trails into these less trafficked areas. So anyways, I know the question is, what can I do? What can I do to support the effort going forward? And I would say, first of all, take the survey. It's out now if you haven't already, and then just look for more information that'll be coming out over the course of the summer about what the process will be and how to stay involved.
I'm wondering if, and this is a question from me and sort of from the frequently asked questions, I'm wondering if you can speak to sort of the holistic approach that the master plan prescribes and that you're working on. And it seems like I read a piece in the Salt Lake Tribune, a letter to the editor, about how it seems like since everyone has a little bit of anxiety, all of the different user groups have a little bit of anxiety about what's happening and the changes that are happening, that maybe you're actually balancing everything really well. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that holistic approach and that comment specifically. I'd be interested in that.
Great. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is I think there is some truth to that, and that when you're hearing frustrations from all sides, you're probably striking, a balanced approach somewhere near the middle. But I think that there are other things going on as well. I feel like, first of all, unlike natural surface trail planning that happens in many locations, instead of trying to plan a single trail here, we endeavored to plan the entire network well in advance and say that, if we build each trail individually in isolation, we're probably not going to achieve the functional whole system that can accommodate a lot of additional use, growth in use, and pressure into the future. And that whole system hasn't been built out yet. That's going to happen over time, probably over 10 years or so. And until the whole system is built, it's not necessarily all functioning. There may be more, more hiking trails, more biking trails, more something than was ultimately envisioned or anticipated in the completion of the system, and including the closure and removal of some trails that are unsustainable. We don't want to just add indefinitely to the system. We wanted to rebuild it and make it sustainable. And in terms of balancing the interests of hikers, trail runners, bikers, I think those are kind of the three primary user groups in the foothills. We really, I believe that we all just want to be out there enjoying the outdoors and enjoying the trails. And I think that we can balance everyone's diverse interests if we do it intelligently and thoughtfully, and we're willing to learn from conditions on the ground and adapt appropriately. And I think there's been a lot of commentary in the media in Salt Lake recently that feels like it's pitting hikers against mountain bikers. And I understand it, but I hate to see it. I feel like we absolutely can all get along. We just need to make sure that the city is continuing to listen to its users and working to identify specific desirable trail experiences for these different user groups. And also, I think, educate ourselves about trail use etiquette. The busier that trails get, the more likely user conflicts are. And I think that's a truism that is going to be seen anywhere. And the only way that we're anticipating trail use trends to go around here is up and up and up. And I think we're quickly learning that where we can, separating some uses is better, just because obviously mountain bikes tend to be looking to move faster on the trails than hikers. They tend to be looking, this is a generalization, but oftentimes they're looking to have a recreational experience with the trail itself. The trail itself is sort of an amenity, whereas I think oftentimes with hikers, it's the experience of being in the landscape, but not the trail itself isn't necessarily an amenity. It's a vehicle to move across the landscape. And those things mean that trails are designed differently for different user groups. They're built differently for different user groups. And at the same time, we don't have infinite space. We don't have infinite space. And so anyways, to wrap up on that, Brian, I think I just want to encourage people to, be patient with each other. It's not about one user group or another getting its way in the foothills to the exclusion of any other. The city is trying very hard to balance multiple uses on a trail system that's feeling a ton of use pressure right now, and that's only, it's only going up. And I think that we can achieve that, but it's going to take time.
That kind of dovetails into another question we have. I'll skip ahead a little bit, but this is from Ian. And speaking of that sort of conflict among user groups, one of those conflicts are parking issues. And Ian on Facebook asks, is there anything being done to address the parking and increase in traffic around the trailheads?
I could speak to what the master plan sought to do to kind of mitigate this issue, and then Lewis, if there's any follow-up in terms of like implementation, you could handle that. We try to be very thoughtful about where we located regional trailheads or trailheads that we're going to be serving more than just the adjacent neighborhoods for the future Foothills Trail System. And we're very cognizant of places like the Morris Meadows trailhead where you know, if you're going to access the trail system and use that trailhead, you're driving through the Avenues neighborhood. So we tried to really locate those regional trailheads in places that weren't going to create undue pressure on the adjacent neighborhood. So for example, the salt storage shed on Bonneville Boulevard was recommended as a new regional trailhead. And we felt that that would serve people accessing City Creek and Morris Meadows without creating those undue traffic and parking impacts in residential neighborhoods. The other thing that we did through the master plan was at those high use regional trailheads, like at Immigration Canyon or on Bonneville Boulevard, like I just mentioned, those are kind of candidates we look to potentially separate uses. So trying to separate downhill bikes that may be looking to go a little faster and might have more conflict with other trail users, including hikers or even uphill bicyclists, and separate those out and give them their own trail to access that regional trailhead, and put the other trail users on a different tread that's going to be more comfortable and have less conflict.
And I just add to that in terms of what's coming up. Salt Lake City has been able to fund the design of a couple of our major regional trailhead access points, extending from the mouth of Immigration Canyon all the way up to City Creek Canyon, and potentially even as far up as Warm Springs near Capitol Hill. And so that design process has started. We haven't funded the trailhead construction yet, but it's something that we're actively working on and acknowledge is extremely important. I think as everyone who's using the foothills has probably noticed, during the pandemic, trail use seemed to explode and it doesn't seem to be going back down. And I know that all of our access points are experiencing use pressure and parking congestion like they never have before. And so we are working hard to make sure those improvements can be made as soon as possible.
So we've got another comment from Facebook, and this one's from Eric. And Eric wants to know, is the city willing to allow feedback from trail users to adjust phase 2 and phase 3 trail design and construction moving forward? Or, have they lost their chance for feedback?
I can take that. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the key here is adaptive management. And as I said in response to an earlier question, the master plan recommendations were, they're intended to be planning level, and we anticipate that there'll be adjustments as those trails are put on the ground. But we don't want to. I do not think that the city is interested in sort of wholesale just rebuilding phase 2 or 3. But I think as we learn from the construction that's happened to date, we learn from our environmental work and from public feedback, and we receive response, we get more feedback from professional trail builders, et cetera. There's going to be a lot of input that goes into 2 and 3 regardless. And so, yeah, I don't think that the public has sort of missed its opportunity to weigh in. And I think it's important for us to continue to hear from people about their interests throughout the process. Also, I want to acknowledge that, a significant amount of the trail construction that's proposed for phases 2 and 3 also crosses other jurisdictions, and it's not just Salt Lake City property. And we need to make sure that those jurisdictions are ultimately going to sign off on the improvements as well. And that's not guaranteed. So there's still much work to do.
Another question from Facebook. Gavin has 2 questions actually, and I'll kind of divide this up into 2 parts. But the first part, Gavin writes that Salt Lake City had enforcement officers through 2002 ticketing people every day in the foothills. There's so much off-trail and illegal travel by all user types happening now, which is causing environmental damage. And Gavin wants to know how many tickets Salt Lake City has given out this year. Is that something that we're still doing? I'm not familiar with it.
Uh, Thanks. That's a great question. To my knowledge, the city's not given out any tickets to people in the foothills this year or in recent years. And I think it's, this speaks to an issue of significant concern. I'm glad that this was brought up. Something that was recommended in the plan is that the city create ongoing funding for management of the trail system and maintenance of the trail system. That's not something that I think that the city has had. I think in the past, the city has funded officers, in some cases through the watershed division or Salt Lake County Animal Services, or had other entities up in the foothills, but there hasn't been a consistent, reliable funding source for that kind of management. And I think that is that should be a key concern for us, and it is something that our team at Public Lands is working very hard on right now, is making sure that the city sets itself up to have a perpetual source of funding to care for the trail system after it's constructed and the master plan has been implemented.
So the second part of Gavin's question, he asks, and I'll open this to both of you. What problems are you most concerned about correcting into the future to protect the foothills and user experience as you work on these plans?
That's a big, wide open question. I should let Dave take it first. I'll think about it.
I could take a stab. I mean, I think COVID has shown us how much demand and potentially latent demand is out there for trail recreation and trail use. And as Lewis mentioned, we've tried to design, or we tried to create the master plan to support the next 25 years of growth in Salt Lake City and evolution in trail use. And that's why we've implemented some of these strategies like single-use trails and directional trails, in that they can just handle larger volumes of users. But at the end of the day, all trails require maintenance, and even sustainably built trails require maintenance. And so coming up with a long-term sustainable strategy to fund the maintenance necessary to support the trail use that we're potentially looking at is going to be a huge challenge.
Thanks, Dave. It's a great point. And I guess, maybe two things that come to mind for me in terms of, what is most concerning, what do we really need to get out ahead of? One of them is just at the end of the day, the trails that we have out there are going to have to accommodate, I think, much higher use than they even have today. And we're going to need to make sure that every trail that is formally part of the system is working very effectively to accommodate a high volume of users. And I think that's going to mean being really intentional about, what users go on what trails, how are those trails designed, how do we mitigate conflicts, and even, as you have hundreds of users on a trail on any given day, that the trail design is designed in such a way that it allows those users to still have this really wonderful experience in the foothills, that it feels peaceful and it feels, quiet and wild. And I think that's going to take a lot of design and management the more users are in the trail system. So that's one thing. I think the other is acknowledging that the foothills are not just for a trail system. They're not just a playground for recreation. It's an incredible natural area, an incredible resource, that we have to have this beautiful landscape so close to home, so close to the city. And this place, it's not only its scenic value, it has tremendous ecological value. There's a lot of great intact native plants, ecosystems, wildlife that live in the foothills that share it with us. And I think the city is really going to need to lead out on investing in the protection of the environmental resources at the same time that we're investing in sort of, protecting and enhancing recreation.
So we've got time for a couple more quick questions before I'm going to invite you both to wrap up with your final thoughts. The first one is a question from Joey on Facebook, and I think he's asking you to do some rumor control. And he writes, I've heard rumors that Salt Lake City's planning on closing steep existing trails like Van Cott Ridge or Black Mountain. Is this true? Some of us enjoy steep trails and don't want those closed. And in Joey's view, they don't need any rehab and they're not causing any problems.
Well, as David mentioned earlier when he was talking about trail rehabilitation and kind of use of steep trails, I think whether a very steep trail ultimately starts causing a lot of problems in large part depends on how much use that trail gets. And so, it's our intention to try to leave as many existing trail experiences out there on the landscape as possible. I'm very familiar with both the trails mentioned, and I personally love them, myself. But I do think, even just, in the time that I've been in Salt Lake City, I've seen those trails continue to get more use, and at least in the case of the Black Mountain Trail, to begin to erode and degrade more. And I think we're just going to need to keep an eye on that and adapt. I think, well, I don't know that there's a whole lot more I can say, except that we're not right now, we're not planning any sort of closure on those trails, but we do need to keep our eye on it. And, a trail that's at a 30% slope up a ridge line that sees, a couple people a day is probably not a problem. But if that trail starts to see 100 people a day at some point in the future, it'll become a problem.
And then the next one is from Deborah on Facebook. And Deborah, if you can address this concern, Deborah writes, why are the trails being built with machinery in these sensitive areas? And it's their understanding that these are not best practices according to federal guidelines. I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Yeah, I definitely can. And I Dave, you might have want to weigh in here as well, but I personally worked on both for trail maintenance and trail construction for the National Park Service and for the Forest Service in locations around the West for a number of years, and it was always handwork. We built everything by hand. In a lot of cases, I was working in the wilderness, and we didn't use motors at all. And, in my mind, that is, that's the gold standard of trail construction. But it's also becoming increasingly challenging to the point of becoming non-feasible to hire hand crews, professional trail builders to bring hand crews out and build work at the kind of scale we're talking about. And Salt Lake City back in 2014, 2015, 2016, we hired a number of hand crews to come out and do work for us. And the rate of progress was, it's incredibly slow compared to having a crew that's got access to a mini excavator. And a lot of times, I think the best, most skilled trail builders now are using equipment like that. We put out, when we put the work out to bid for phase one, we didn't dictate, oh, you have to do this by machine. But every single professional trail builder that responded to our bid proposed using a machine as part of the work and then following up with a hand crew. And I can speak from experience that the hand crew work oftentimes, will take longer, like an order of magnitude, maybe 10 times longer, and it's similar in terms of cost from what I've seen. So I think that really is, why we've been building with, or hiring people who build with machinery. There are definitely some pros and cons, but from what I've seen, a good trail builder with a small machine, a small mini X, can still build a very narrow trail and one that feels very, it doesn't feel like a highway or a road.
So I want to thank everyone who's been sending in questions through the Facebook. I think this has been a very productive conversation. But Dave and Lewis, I'd like to give you both the chance to sort of offer us any closing thoughts that you have, and make sure you address anything that maybe you feel the questions weren't able to address. And Dave, why don't we start with you and give you a chance to wrap things up?
Great, thanks, Brian. I think the overall intent of this master planning process was to create a 21st century trail plan that responded to current trends in trail recreation. We tried to be a 21st century plan in how we engaged the public, and we did a number of different public outreach activities. We had an online map, we had a deep dive workshop with a lot of local stakeholders involved, including Trails Utah and University of Utah and many others. And, there's sort of a history of conflict between trail users that I'm not sure we're ever going to overcome. There's always going to be one person out there that's not going to adhere to proper trail etiquette. And but we want to do our best to not create structural issues that are kind of exacerbating that. And, using single-use trails is not for the benefit of a single trail user. It's really for the benefit of everyone, whether that's a hike-only trail or a descending bike trail. It's really to keep everybody safe and try to maintain a really high-quality trail experience for everyone. So that's kind of the goal of what the Trail Master Plan is trying to achieve.
Then, Lewis, do you want to take the final word here before I wrap things up?
Sure. Thanks, Brian and Dave. That was really well said. I think the last thing I want to do is just thank everybody who tuned in today, or will watch this later, or who has participated in our planning efforts at any time. I think all of us care a tremendous amount about this place, about Salt Lake City would not be Salt Lake City without the foothills, and we know it, and you know it, and we rely very much on everyone's passion and concern for this place. And I guess my final word is just a word of appreciation that, regardless of what feedback we're getting from people, we appreciate it. It's very important for us to hear from everyone, and please understand, we are listening, we do care, and we're trying to do the best for everyone and for the resource.
So thank you, Lewis, and thank you, David, for answering all of the questions from folks watching today, as well as, my questions when I had them. If anyone watching this has a specific question that you didn't feel was addressed during the event, please don't hesitate to email us at openspacecomments@slcgov.com. If you're interested in learning more about the Trails Plan, visit slctrails.com. And also on slctrails.com, you can provide feedback through an online survey on any of the new trails that have been constructed as part of phase 1 of the Trails Plan. So Salt Lake City's Trails and Natural Lands Division will be gathering community feedback throughout the summer, both through this online survey as well as through other methods. So if you have a chance or see a chance to talk to them, do take them up on that. I know they do want to hear your feedback. So I want to thank you all, Lewis and David, for participating in the live Q&A session, and for everyone watching. Salt Lake City really does appreciate everyone who's engaged us through this process. So thank you, and until next time, I'm Brian Young with Salt Lake City TV.